My parents said I was on my own financially, then bought my sister a condo for her 21st. I quietly moved to another state. 4 years later, my thesis made national news, and they found out on Facebook like everyone else. The first thing my father ever taught me about money was that nothing comes for free. At 7 years old, standing in our comfortable suburban Massachusetts home, he handed me a small chore chart with dollar amounts next to each task: 50 cents for making my bed, $1 for taking out the trash, $2 for helping my mom with dinner. "This is how the world works, Cynthia," he explained, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. "You work, you earn." By contrast, my younger sister, Melissa's introduction to finances came in the form of spontaneous shopping sprees and casual handouts whenever she pointed at something she wanted. This pattern established itself early and only deepened as we grew older. Growing up, I never questioned the disparity. Dad was a successful financial advisor at a prestigious Boston firm, while Mom managed the perfect home and social calendar that complemented his career. I was the serious, studious daughter who earned her keep through academic achievement and responsibility. Melissa was the bubbly, charismatic one whose emotional outbursts and social skills somehow translated into material rewards. The family dynamic had been cemented long before I had the vocabulary to name it. "Cynthia is so independent," my mother would tell her friends at dinner parties, pride glimmering in her voice. "She doesn't need anyone's help." This narrative became my identity. Cynthia the self-sufficient, while Melissa remained perpetually 12 years old in their eyes, fragile and in need of constant support despite growing into a perfectly capable young woman. The summer before my senior year of high school, I landed an internship at a biotech lab through a competitive science program. The position was prestigious but unpaid. Dad refused to supplement my income during those 3 months. "This is good preparation for the real world," he insisted, while signing a check for Melissa's third failed driving test that same week. "You've got savings from your tutoring job. Use those." I depleted my personal savings that summer, money I'd been carefully setting aside for college expenses, working weekends at a coffee shop to afford gas money for my 40-minute commute to the lab. Nevertheless, the experience was transformative. Dr. Sani Kapoor, the lab director, became the first adult who saw beyond my usefulness. She noticed my obsessive attention to experimental details and encouraged me to pursue graduate studies in molecular biology. "You have a researcher's mind," she told me, after I identified an anomaly in a dataset that others had overlooked. "Don't waste it." When college acceptance letters arrived senior year, I received offers from 7 prestigious universities, including a partial scholarship to MIT. My parents hosted a dinner celebration during which Dad cleared his throat and delivered what he considered pragmatic advice. "Your mother and I have discussed your education funding," he announced while passing the potatoes. "We've decided you're capable of managing your financial future independently. Student loans will teach you fiscal responsibility. We're very proud of you for getting this far on your own merit." I nodded, swallowing hard. I'd anticipated this conversation. Years of conditioning had prepared me to accept that my education was my responsibility alone. What I hadn't prepared for was what came next. "Besides," Mom chimed in, refilling her wine glass, "we need to start thinking about Melissa's future. She'll need more support with her different strengths." Melissa, then 17, texted throughout this conversation, oblivious to its implications for both our futures. I excused myself early that night and cried silently in my bedroom, calculating loan amounts against potential starting salaries in scientific research. I chose Boston University, not my dream school, but the one offering the most substantial financial package. The campus was close enough to commute from home, saving me thousands in housing costs. For 2 years, I lived in my childhood bedroom, worked 20 hours weekly at the university library, maintained a 3.9 GPA, and slowly built relationships with professors who might later write recommendation letters for graduate school. Those 2 years in my childhood bedroom felt like living in limbo, suspended between adulthood and adolescence, independence and constraint. Each morning, I'd wake at 5:30 a.m. to study before my 8:00 a.m. advanced biochemistry class. The house would still be silent. Mom and Dad asleep in their master suite, Melissa's room an undisturbed sanctuary, until at least 10 o'clock a.m. most days. I cherished these pre-dawn hours. the only time the house truly felt like mine. Professor Janet Weber took particular interest in my academic progress. A stern woman with salt and pepper hair, always pulled into a tight bun, she intimidated most undergrads with her rapid-fire questioning and uncompromising standards. During my sophomore year, she pulled me aside after I scored highest on her notoriously difficult midterm exam. "You're wasting time here, Cynthia," she stated bluntly, shuffling papers into her leather briefcase. "You should be at MIT or Stanford." "Financial constraints," I explained, the excuse well rehearsed by then. BU offered the best package. She studied me over her reading glasses. "There are other forms of support for exceptional students: research assistantships, private fellowships, corporate sponsorships." "I've applied for 17 scholarships this semester alone," I admitted. "Still waiting to hear back." Professor Weber nodded thoughtfully. "Come to my office hours tomorrow. I have contacts at several research foundations who should know about your work." Through Professor Weber's connections, I secured a paid research position in Dr. Alan Mercer's immunology lab the following semester. The stipend was modest, but allowed me to cut back my library hours slightly. Dr. Mercer, a brilliant scientist with a booming laugh and perpetually stained lab coat, became my second significant mentor after Dr. Kapoor. "Science requires persistence above all else," he told me, after an experiment failed for the fourth consecutive time. "Intelligence is common. Curiosity is rarer. Stubborn determination in the face of repeated failure. That's the real gift. You have it in spades, Cynthia." At home, my parents barely noticed my academic achievements or growing reputation in the university science department. Dinner conversations revolved around Dad's clients, Mom's social engagements, and endless discussions of Melissa's social dramas and shifting career aspirations, which changed monthly. Fashion designer, social media influencer, event planner, interior decorator. During my junior year, I received the prestigious Markinson Undergraduate Research Award, a significant honor that included a monetary prize and publication opportunity. When I shared the news at dinner, Dad nodded absently. "That's nice, Cynthia. Will it help with your student loans?" Mom glanced up briefly from her phone. "Is there a ceremony? Should we mark our calendars?" Before I could answer, Melissa burst through the front door, teary-eyed over a disagreement with her boyfriend. The conversation immediately pivoted to her emotional crisis, my achievement forgotten in the whirlwind of her distress. I excused myself and retreated to my room, where I called Professor Weber to share my news with someone who would understand its significance. The contrast between my university life and home existence grew increasingly stark. At school, professors sought my input, peers respected my insights, and my research garnered legitimate attention. At home, I remained a self-sufficient daughter who required minimal involvement, useful for household tasks, but otherwise unremarkable. Melissa graduated high school with middling grades and an undefined future. She enrolled at a local community college, dropped half her classes midway through the first semester, then transferred to a small private college with minimal admission standards and maximum tuition costs. My parents covered every expense without comment. The day Melissa announced her transfer to Westfield Academy, a private college known more for its country club atmosphere than academic rigor, Dad immediately wrote a check for the enrollment deposit. Mom spent the afternoon browsing luxury bedding websites from Melissa's dorm room. "Westfield has excellent networking opportunities," Dad justified when he saw me calculating the tuition figures. "Sometimes who you know matters more than what you know, Cynthia." Melissa's first semester at Westfield proved challenging, despite the school's reputation for academic leniency. She called home weekly, sometimes daily, overwhelmed by basic coursework requirements and social pressures. Each crisis prompted a flurry of parental intervention. Mom driving the 40 minutes to campus to help organize her assignments, Dad hiring tutors at $85 per hour, both parents spending hours on the phone talking her through emotional meltdowns about roommate conflicts or party invitations. Meanwhile, I juggled 30 credit course loads with research responsibilities and work shifts, often surviving on vending machine dinners during late nights at the lab. The semester I developed pneumonia and missed 2 weeks of classes, I received one text from Mom asking if I needed cough medicine. I declined, having already purchased it myself. When Melissa's midterm grades arrived, mostly C's and D's despite the extensive support system, my parents called an emergency strategy session with academic advisors at Westfield. They emerged with a reduced course load for Melissa and permission for extended deadlines on all assignments. Melissa processes information differently, Mom explained to relatives at Thanksgiving dinner. She's more creative than analytical. The traditional academic structure doesn't recognize her unique gifts. Aunt Diane, Dad's straight-talking sister, raised an eyebrow. And yet Cynthia manages just fine in that same system with zero help. Cynthia's different, Mom replied dismissively. She's always been independent. Independent or neglected, Aunt Diane muttered into her wine glass, just loudly enough for me to hear from the kitchen where I was washing dishes. She winked when she caught my eye, the first acknowledgement from any family member that the disparity in our treatment might be problematic rather than natural. By her third semester at Westfield, Melissa had changed her major 3 times, from communications to art history to business administration. Each shift required new textbooks, supplies, and occasionally summer courses to fulfill prerequisite requirements. The costs mounted without discussion. 3 weeks before Melissa's 21st birthday, Mom called me to the living room for a family meeting. Dad sat in his leather armchair, reading glasses perched on his nose, reviewing documents spread across the coffee table. "We have exciting news," Mom announced, her face flushed with anticipation. "We've purchased Melissa a condo near her campus as an early birthday gift. It's a fantastic investment opportunity, and it'll give her the stability she needs to focus on finding her path." Dad nodded solemnly. "The market is perfect right now. 2 bedrooms, modern kitchen, doorman building. She'll have security and independence." "That's generous," I managed, my voice steady despite the hollowness expanding in my chest. "Well, she's struggling to find direction," Mom explained. "Having her own space might help her mature faster." "We're co-signing her car loan too," Dad added. "She needs reliable transportation to explore internship opportunities." That evening, I applied to 12 PhD programs across the country, targeting institutions known for generous research stipends. I said nothing to my parents about my applications. The following week, I picked up extra shifts at the library, opened a separate bank account at a different bank, and began liquidating everything I couldn't fit into 2 suitcases. 3 months later, I received an acceptance letter from Northwestern University's Molecular Biosciences PhD program with a full funding package, including a stipend and health insurance. The program specialized in innovative disease treatment research, exactly the field Dr. Kapoor had encouraged me to pursue. I sent my acceptance immediately and gave notice at my library job. The night before Melissa's housewarming party, I informed my parents I wouldn't attend because I had a work commitment. The next morning, while they were at the party helping Melissa arrange furniture in her new condo, I loaded my belongings into a rideshare and headed to the airport. I left a brief note on my meticulously made bed. "Taking an opportunity in Chicago. We'll be in touch once settled, Cynthia." The decision to leave hadn't materialized overnight. For months, I'd been meticulously planning my exit strategy, researching Chicago neighborhoods, calculating living expenses against my stipend, connecting with potential roommates through Northwestern's Graduate Housing Forum. Each acceptance letter that arrived deepened my resolve. Each check my parents wrote for Melissa's benefit strengthened my determination. The morning of my departure brought unexpected calm. I'd anticipated second thoughts, perhaps even a wave of guilt for leaving without a proper goodbye. Instead, I felt only certainty and the lightness of long-delayed liberation. My childhood bedroom, stripped of personal items, no longer resembled the space where I'd spent thousands of nights. The bookshelves stood empty, dust outlines marking where science awards and academic trophies had once been displayed. I donated most of my clothes to a women's shelter, keeping only what served practical purposes for my new life. The note I left was deliberately brief, providing information without inviting discussion. No apologies, no justifications, no emotional pleas. The same matter-of-fact tone my parents had used when informing me of their decision not to fund my education. During the rideshare to Boston Logan Airport, the driver, a gregarious man named Carlos with a philosophy degree and strong opinions about public transportation, asked why I was headed to Chicago. "Starting over," I replied, watching my neighborhood recede through the rear window. "Running from something or toward something?" he asked. meeting my eyes in the rearview mirror. The question gave me pause. Both, I suppose, but mostly toward. Carlos nodded approvingly. Toward is better. Toward has purpose. At the airport, I splurged on an overpriced sandwich, my first small act of independence, spending without calculating the exact impact on my carefully managed budget. The departure board showed my flight would leave on time. No delays, no complications, no last-minute obstacles. The universe seemed to approve of my decision. While waiting at the gate, I received a text from Melissa. "Where are you? Mom's freaking out. The caterer brought shrimp puffs instead of crab puffs, and she needs you to call them." I didn't respond. Melissa's problems, and my parents' expectations that I would solve them, belonged to a life I was leaving behind. The phone buzzed again as boarding began. I silenced it without checking the message and stepped onto the plane. Mom called 17 times that day. I texted back once I landed. "Arrive safely. Starting new job soon. We'll call when I have time." Dad's only message came 3 days later. "Your decision to leave so abruptly was immature and disappointing. Your mother is upset. Call her when you're ready to explain yourself properly." I didn't call. Instead, I immersed myself in Northwestern's molecular biosciences program. Chicago's distance from Boston provided both physical and emotional space to build a life based entirely on my own choices. I found a small apartment with 2 roommates, fellow graduate students named Zoe and Nadia, who quickly became the supportive family I'd never experienced. They didn't expect me to be self-sufficient or perfect. They just appreciated my company and respected my boundaries. Communication with my parents dwindled to holiday texts and occasional stilted phone calls. I declined invitations to fly home for Christmas, citing lab responsibilities. My parents never offered to visit me. Melissa, preoccupied with her own life, occasionally sent erratic messages about parties or shopping finds, but never asked substantive questions about my research or well-being. The first Christmas away from home was harder than I'd anticipated. The university campus emptied, laboratories closed for the holiday week, and even Chicago itself seemed to pause beneath a blanket of fresh snow. Zoe had flown home to Portland, while Nadia celebrated with her boyfriend's family in Michigan. I wandered through our apartment, the silence amplifying my unexpected loneliness. Around noon, Mom called. "Merry Christmas, Cynthia. We miss you at dinner. Aunt Diane asked about you." "Merry Christmas," I replied, staring out the window at the deserted street below. "Tell everyone hello for me." "There's still time to book a last-minute flight," she suggested. "Your father would pay for it, just this once." The offer, the first financial assistance they'd extended since my departure, felt less like generosity and more like an attempt to maintain appearances. The empty chair at Christmas dinner required explanation to relatives. My absence needed justification. "The lab reopens tomorrow," I lied. "I'm scheduled for early experiments." The disappointment in her sigh seemed genuine, complicating my narrative of parental indifference. "Well, Melissa will be disappointed. She bought you a gift and everything." Later that evening, I received a text from Melissa with a photo of her wearing an expensive-looking cashmere sweater. "Look what Mom and Dad got me. Miss you, I guess. Christmas isn't the same without someone to make fun of Dad's carving skills." I replied with a thumbs-up emoji and turned off my phone. The following day, I volunteered at a community dinner for international students unable to travel home for the holidays. Among these strangers, graduate students from China, India, Brazil, and dozens of other countries, I found unexpected connection. We shared stories of family traditions, academic struggles, and the disorienting experience of building adult lives far from familiar foundations. Lin, a physics doctoral candidate from Shanghai, summarized the sentiment perfectly. Sometimes you must journey very far to discover who you truly are without others' expectations shaping your identity. The second Christmas away proved easier. I built traditions with my new Chicago family, a potluck dinner with fellow researchers, an evening walk along the lakefront to view holiday lights, a secret Santa exchange with increasingly absurd scientific themes. Mom still called, but the conversation felt more procedural than emotional, a ritual maintained out of habit rather than connection. By the third Christmas, they stopped asking when I might visit. The pretense that my absence was temporary had finally dissolved into acknowledgement of the permanent separation I'd established. Dad sent an impersonal holiday card with a gift certificate to a national restaurant chain. Melissa texted a selfie from Aspen, where she was vacationing with friends, all expenses covered by our parents. Naturally, the distance I created wasn't just geographical. With each passing month, my psychological independence from family expectations strengthened. I no longer measured my achievements against their potential reactions. I stopped rehearsing justifications for my choices. Most significantly, I ceased expecting recognition that would never come. 2 years into my program, I joined Dr. Marcus Rivera's lab, focusing on novel approaches to treating aggressive forms of pancreatic cancer. The work consumed me in the best possible way. Dr. Rivera recognized my capacity for innovative thinking and encouraged me to pursue a particularly risky experimental approach that mainstream researchers had dismissed. Big breakthroughs rarely come from safe science, he advised, authorizing additional resources for my project. Follow your instincts. The transition to Dr. Rivera's lab marked a turning point in my research career. His laboratory occupied the entire 5th floor of Northwestern's Biomedical Research Center, a gleaming facility with state-of-the-art equipment and panoramic views of Lake Michigan. Unlike previous supervisors who micromanaged every experimental protocol, Dr. Rivera operated on a principle of guided autonomy. He provided resources and strategic direction while trusting researchers to navigate technical challenges independently. My project focused on nanoparticle delivery systems for targeting pancreatic tumor cells. Traditional treatments for pancreatic cancer faced a significant obstacle. The dense stromal tissue surrounding tumors formed a nearly impenetrable barrier against chemotherapy agents. My approach involved engineering nanoparticles that could penetrate this protective layer by exploiting specific molecular pathways. The concept wasn't entirely new. Several research teams had attempted similar approaches with limited success. What distinguished my methodology was a counterintuitive modification to the nanoparticle surface that actually utilized the tumor's defensive mechanisms to facilitate drug delivery. By disguising therapeutic compounds within structures that mimic nutrients essential for tumor growth, we could potentially transform the cancer's strengths into vulnerabilities. Dr. Rivera approved my experimental design, despite skepticism from several senior researchers on the team. Sometimes the most promising paths look like dead ends to conventional thinkers, he said during a tense laboratory meeting where my proposal faced criticism. Cynthia sees angles others miss. Let's give her hypothesis room to prove itself. The first 6 months yielded frustrating results. My initial nanoparticle formulations degraded too quickly in plasma conditions. Subsequent iterations successfully penetrated the stromal barrier, but delivered insufficient drug concentrations to affect tumor viability. Each failure necessitated redesign, synthesis, and comprehensive testing, an exhaustive cycle that consumed 18-hour days and countless weekends. During this period, Melissa graduated from college with a business degree and immediately secured a marketing position at a Boston firm where Dad's golf partner served as CEO. My parents celebrated with a European cruise. I learned about these developments through Facebook photos and brief text messages, too immersed in laboratory troubleshooting to register more than mild acknowledgement. The breakthrough occurred unexpectedly at 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. I'd been running simulations on modified nanoparticle structures, tweaking molecular configurations to enhance stability while maintaining targeting specificity. A computational model revealed an unusual interaction pattern when certain surface proteins were arranged in asymmetrical formations rather than the uniform distribution conventional wisdom dictated. I called Dr. Rivera despite the hour. He arrived 30 minutes later, still wearing pajama pants beneath his hastily donned lab coat. Together, we reviewed the simulation data, then immediately designed experimental protocols to test the computational predictions. By dawn, we'd outlined a comprehensive research strategy that would require thousands of laboratory hours and unprecedented collaboration across multiple specialties within the department. This could be revolutionary, Dr. Rivera said, rubbing his eyes as morning light streamed through laboratory windows. Not just for pancreatic cancer, but potentially for any solid tumor with similar microenvironmental characteristics. The following 18 months were both grueling and exhilarating. I assembled a small team of researchers with complementary expertise: Adrienne specializing in molecular modeling, Thomas in biochemical synthesis, and Priya in cellular imaging techniques. We operated with singular focus, often sleeping on cots in the laboratory break room rather than wasting precious time commuting home. Animal trials began 9 months into the project. The initial results exceeded even our optimistic projections. Tumor reduction rates of 63% in mouse models receiving our nanoparticle treatment, compared to 17% in control groups receiving standard chemotherapy regimens. More importantly, toxicity profiles showed minimal damage to healthy tissues, suggesting our targeting mechanism functioned with remarkable specificity. Dr. Rivera secured emergency funding from the American Cancer Society to accelerate our research timeline. The university assigned additional laboratory space and technical staff to support our expanding experiments. Each promising result attracted further institutional investment and growing interest from the broader scientific community. Throughout this period of intense work and mounting excitement, my personal life remained narrowly focused on research objectives and the close-knit relationships I'd formed with laboratory colleagues. Weekly dinners with Zoe and Nadia provided necessary emotional anchoring. Occasional calls with Dr. Kapoor offered perspective and guidance from someone who had witnessed my journey from undergraduate intern to emerging research scientist. My parents remained peripheral figures, unaware of the growing significance of my work. Their occasional messages focused on superficial inquiries about weather conditions in Chicago, forwarded articles about robberies in urban areas, subtle reminders to stay safe that conveyed more concern about city living than genuine interest in my well-being or accomplishments. By my 4th year in the program, after nearly 2 years of intensive work in Dr. Four Riveria's lab, our team had developed a groundbreaking therapeutic approach using nanomaterials to selectively target pancreatic cancer cells. The results surpassed everyone's expectations. Our treatment showed unprecedented efficacy in animal models, reducing tumors by over 70%, with minimal side effects on healthy tissue. Dr. Rivera insisted I take lead authorship on the paper we submitted to the journal Nature. When the research was accepted for publication, the university's PR department arranged interviews with several major news outlets. Within weeks of publication, our findings were featured on national news programs, medical journals, and mainstream publications, including Time magazine. Northwestern hosted a press conference where I explained our findings to medical reporters and science journalists. A photo of me gesturing toward a molecular model appeared on the front page of the Chicago Tribune Science section. The university created a dedicated page on their website detailing our breakthrough, complete with my biography and research journey. Throughout this whirlwind of academic recognition, I never thought to contact my parents. They weren't part of this achievement or the life I built. I posted a simple update on Facebook, my first in years, honored that our lab's pancreatic cancer research has been published in Nature. Link to full article below for interested colleagues. The congratulatory comments accumulated quickly. Former professors, high school friends, distant relatives, and my growing network of scientific peers. Dr. Kapoor wrote a particularly touching message about always knowing I would make significant contributions to the field. 3 days after the Facebook post, my phone rang with my mother's number. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but answered on the final ring. Cynthia, her voice sounded smaller than I remembered. We saw the news about your research. It's all over Facebook. The Hendersons sent us an article from the New York Times. Yes, it's been a busy week, I replied, maintaining professional detachment. Your father and I, we had no idea your work was so important, she continued, an unfamiliar hesitancy in her tone. Cancer research, and you're the lead scientist. I'm the lead author on this particular study, yes. Our entire lab contributed to the breakthrough. A pause stretched between us. I could hear her breathing, formulating a response. Why didn't you tell us? We had to find out through Facebook like we're strangers. The irony struck me then, how perfectly the situation mirrored my own discovery of Melissa's condo through an enthusiastic social media post years earlier. I hadn't planned this symmetry, but it felt satisfying nonetheless. I've been focused on the research, I answered truthfully. There's been little time for personal calls. But this is major news, Cynthia. The The article said your work could save thousands of lives, her voice cracked. Don't you think that warranted a phone call to your family? The term family hung in the air between us. I let it linger until its hollowness became apparent to us both. I informed the people who have supported my journey, I finally said. My lab partners, my mentors, my friends here in Chicago. Another silence followed, heavier than the last. Your father wants to speak with you, she said eventually. I heard muffled voices as the phone changed hands. Cynthia, Dad's authoritative tone had diminished somewhat since I'd last heard it. This is quite an achievement. The article mentioned potential applications for pharmaceutical development. Have you considered the financial implications? I know someone at Vertex Pharmaceuticals who might be interested in discussing. Northwestern's Technology Transfer Office handles those aspects, I interrupted. I'm focused on the science. Of course, but these connections can be valuable. Your research clearly has significant commercial potential. We should discuss how to maximize. There is no we in this equation, Dad, I stated calmly. The university has an entire department managing intellectual property and commercialization pathways. My priorities are continuing the research and moving toward clinical trials. The conversation stalled. For perhaps the first time in our relationship, my father seemed unsure how to proceed. Your mother and I would like to visit, he said finally. See your lab, take you to dinner. We've clearly missed important developments in your life. I considered the request. Part of me wanted to deny them access to this world I'd built without their support. Another part recognized this as a potential turning point, maybe not for reconciliation, but for acknowledgement. I have a conference in San Diego next month, I replied. My schedule is fully booked until then. I can let you know when I have availability after I return. Dad cleared his throat. Cynthia, I think perhaps we owe you an apology. We may have underestimated your potential and what you were working toward. The statement wasn't exactly an apology for their treatment of me, merely an admission they'd miscalculated the outcome of their neglect. They'd expected me to lead a modest, unremarkable life, not become a scientific pioneer making headlines. I appreciate that perspective, I responded neutrally. I should go now. The lab is expecting me for an afternoon meeting. After hanging up, I sat at my desk for several minutes, processing the conversation. My phone buzzed with a text from Zoe. Conference room, reserved for celebration dinner tonight. Whole team coming. Rivera bringing champagne. You in? I smiled and typed back. Wouldn't miss it. My real family. 2 days later, a large floral arrangement arrived at the lab with a card reading, Congratulations on your extraordinary achievement. We're so proud. Love, Mom and Dad. Several colleagues commented on the impressive display. I donated the flowers to the hospital wing, where many pancreatic cancer patients receive treatment. A week after our phone conversation, an email arrived from my father containing investment strategy, suggestions in light of potential future patent royalties, and offering to connect me with wealth management professionals who understand sudden financial success. I forwarded it to my spam folder without responding. Melissa finally texted 3 weeks after the news broke. OMG, sis, like famous now. Saw thing on the news. So cool. We should totally catch up sometime. I replied with a simple thumbs up emoji and returned to reviewing data from our latest experiments. My parents eventually visited Chicago 4 months later. I gave them a brief tour of the public areas of our research facility, introduced them to Dr. Rivera and a few colleagues, then accompanied them to an awkward dinner where they asked surface-level questions about my work, while avoiding any mention of our estrangement. Your apartment is cozy, Mom commented when they dropped me off afterward. Have you considered upgrading now that your career is taking off? I'm comfortable where I am, I replied, thinking of the Friday movie nights with Zoe and Nadia, the shared meals, the late-night conversations about science and life and dreams. It suits my needs perfectly. They flew back to Boston the following morning. Our relationship remained distant but cordial, occasional emails, holiday phone calls, and perfunctory birthday wishes. They never explicitly acknowledged the inequality that had defined our family dynamic, and I never demanded the recognition. The validation I'd once craved from them had been rendered irrelevant by the life I'd constructed without their support. 3 years after the Nature publication, I accepted a tenure-track position at the University of California, San Francisco, leading my own research team focused on expanding our cancer treatment approach to other aggressive malignancies. The university press release announcing my appointment mentioned my groundbreaking work at Northwestern and pioneering contributions to targeted cancer therapeutics. The move to San Francisco meant leaving behind the close-knit support system I'd built in Chicago. Zoe had accepted a position at the University of Washington in Seattle, while Nadia remained in Chicago with her now husband. We promised to maintain our friendship through regular video calls and annual reunions. Though the physical distance changed the dynamic of our daily interactions, the depth of connection remained. We'd been through too much together to let geography diminish what we built. A reporter from a scientific journal interviewed me about my career trajectory and asked what inspired me to pursue such challenging research. I thought carefully before answering. Early in life, I learned that resources aren't always distributed equitably, I said. Some people receive abundant support, while others must create opportunities from nothing. My research focuses on directing therapeutic resources precisely where they're needed most. In both science and life, I believe in addressing inequities through strategic intervention rather than passive acceptance. The reporter nodded thoughtfully, unaware of the personal history behind my response. The article was published online the following week. My father forwarded it to me with a single-line message. Your mother and I recognize ourselves in this quote. Perhaps someday we can have an honest conversation about the past. I saved the email but didn't respond immediately. The acknowledgement, while small, represented a shift in awareness I hadn't anticipated. I wasn't sure if reconciliation was possible or even desirable, but the recognition itself held a certain value. Days passed as I contemplated my father's message. The university campus buzzed with springtime energy. Students sprawled across lawns, studying for finals, cherry trees blooming along pedestrian pathways, research facilities humming with pre-summer productivity. My lab team had expanded to 15 members, each researcher pursuing specialized aspects of our therapeutic approach. I divided time between supervising doctoral students, writing grant proposals, and developing experimental protocols for our upcoming clinical trials. During an afternoon coffee break, I reread Dad's email on my phone, still uncertain how or whether to respond. Dr. Rivera noticed my distraction as he joined me at the campus cafe. Difficult correspondence? He asked, sliding into the chair opposite mine. Family complications, I replied, setting the phone aside. Nothing urgent. Dr. Rivera nodded. Having mentored dozens of scientists throughout his career, he developed an intuitive understanding of the personal struggles that often accompanied professional achievement. Family dynamics have inertia, he observed. They continue in established patterns unless acted upon by significant external forces. Newton applies to human relationships. I smiled. An interesting theoretical framework. Less theoretical than experiential, he replied. My own parents never understood my scientific career. They wanted a doctor who treated patients, not one who researched obscure cellular mechanisms. It took my mother's cancer diagnosis for them to appreciate the importance of basic research. The parallel to my situation wasn't exact, but the underlying message resonated. Sometimes perspective shifts required dramatic catalysts rather than gradual enlightenment. My research breakthrough had provided that catalyst for my parents, forcing them to reconsider their perception of me and their own parenting choices. Did you reconcile with them? I asked, partially curious, partially hopeful. Dr. Rivera answered, We established a more honest relationship, though certain wounds never fully healed. The question isn't whether complete reconciliation is possible, but whether the relationship can evolve into something healthier than before. That evening in my apartment, I finally composed a reply to Dad's email. I appreciate your recognition of the subtext in that interview. My research focuses on directing resources where they're most effective, a principle with applications beyond science. I'm open to honest conversations, but honesty requires acknowledging specific patterns rather than speaking in generalities. If you're prepared for that level of candor, we might find constructive dialogue possible. His response arrived the following morning. Your mother and I have been reflecting on our parenting decisions. We believe treating you and Melissa differently addressed your different needs. Perhaps we misjudged those needs or allowed our perceptions to justify inequitable treatment. I don't expect immediate forgiveness, but I hope you'll consider allowing us to better understand your perspective. The message suggested a capacity for self-reflection I hadn't previously attributed to my father. Whether this represented a genuine evolution or merely damage control remained unclear. People rarely changed fundamentally, particularly after decades of entrenched behavior patterns, yet occasional transformative shifts in awareness did occur, often catalyzed by unexpected consequences of long-established choices. I shared the email exchange with Zoe during our weekly dinner. After moving into separate apartments the previous year, we had maintained our friendship through scheduled meals and spontaneous phone calls. Her perspective as someone from a similarly complicated family dynamic offered valuable insight. "They're finally realizing they lost something valuable by underestimating you," she commented, refilling our wine glasses. "The question is whether they're mourning the relationship they could have had with you or just regretting missing the prestige of having a famous scientist daughter." "Probably both," I admitted. "Dad particularly values association with success." Then the real question becomes whether any relationship moving forward can be authentic rather than transactional. We concluded that people could change, but usually within the fundamental framework of their personalities, not transforming entirely. Over subsequent weeks, communication with my parents increased slightly in frequency and depth. Our exchanges remained primarily email-based, the written format allowing for more careful consideration than spontaneous phone conversations would permit. We avoided direct confrontation about past inequities, instead establishing tentative connections through discussions of current events, scientific developments, and occasionally philosophical questions about purpose and meaning. Mom sent a handwritten letter describing her volunteer work with literacy programs at local elementary schools, a recent endeavor she'd undertaken after decades of focusing exclusively on social engagements with Dad's colleagues and clients. "I'm finding satisfaction in helping children who might otherwise slip through educational cracks," she wrote. "Sometimes I wonder if I recognize Melissa's struggles more readily than your capabilities because her difficulties resembled my own academic challenges." The acknowledgement of her biased perception represented progress, however limited. In my response, I shared details about my mentorship program for female undergraduate students interested in research careers. "Creating supportive pathways for developing scientists has become increasingly important to me," I explained. "Many brilliant minds never reach their potential due to systemic barriers or insufficient encouragement at critical junctures." Our careful correspondence established boundaries and possibilities simultaneously, areas we could navigate together and territories that remained too fraught for productive exploration. The relationship evolved into something neither intimately familiar nor entirely professional, a unique category defying conventional definition. Melissa remained largely peripheral to this evolving dynamic. Her sporadic messages continued focusing on external developments rather than meaningful connection, a promotion at work, a new relationship, an apartment renovation. She avoided acknowledging the shifting relationship between our parents and me, perhaps sensing that genuine examination of family patterns would necessitate uncomfortable reassessment of her own role within those dynamics. Later that evening, I received another message, this one from Melissa. She'd apparently read the same article. "Hey sis, saw your interview. That comment about resources seemed kind of pointed. Mom and Dad think it was about them. Were you trying to make them feel bad or something?" I considered how to respond, weighing honesty against the potential fallout. Finally, I typed, "I stated a scientific philosophy that happens to parallel my personal experience. My success isn't about making anyone feel bad. It's about creating something meaningful despite obstacles." "Hope you're well," Melissa replied quickly. "They helped me because I needed it more than you. You were always so smart and capable. It wasn't fair, but they thought they were doing what was best." The justification was familiar, the same reasoning I'd heard throughout childhood to explain the disparity in our treatment. For the first time, however, I felt no sting from the words, no residual hurt or anger. The explanation seemed small and irrelevant compared to the life I built and the work that now defined me. "We all made choices," I wrote back. "I'm at peace with mine." That evening, I walked to a small park near my San Francisco apartment and sat watching the sunset over the bay. The western horizon blazed with color, not just the anticipated oranges and reds, but unexpected purples and golds emerging from atmospheric conditions I couldn't precisely name. Science could explain the phenomenon, but the explanation didn't diminish its beauty or impact. My phone vibrated with an email notification. The NIH had approved our lab's grant application for an expanded clinical trial. The message included congratulations from the review committee, noting our innovative approach to a previously intractable medical challenge. We would receive full funding for the next 5 years. I smiled, thinking of the patients whose lives might change because of work that had grown from rejection and determination. The path had been harder than necessary, marked by inequities I couldn't control, yet those very obstacles had shaped my perspective, fostering resilience and independence that now served a purpose beyond mere survival. Sometimes I reflected, the greatest revenge against unfairness isn't confrontation or resentment, but the quiet construction of something meaningful from whatever materials life provides. My parents had told me I was on my own financially. They never anticipated that on my own would become not a punishment, but a foundation for accomplishment they could neither claim credit for nor fully comprehend. I typed a brief response to my father's email before heading home. I'm open to honest conversations when both parties are ready for complete honesty. Until then, I'm focused on the work ahead. My team just received major funding for clinical trials. If you're genuinely interested in understanding what drives me, that would be a good place to start. Whether they would make that effort remained uncertain. What I knew with absolute clarity was that their response no longer determined my worth or happiness. The validation I'd once desperately sought from them had been rendered obsolete by the authentic recognition I'd earned through my own efforts and the genuine connections I'd formed along the way. The story my parents had written for me ended the day I left Massachusetts. The story I was writing for myself was still unfolding, page by page, discovery by discovery. And unlike the narrative of my childhood, I controlled the direction of every chapter.